This is the Hard Thing Podcast. Today, we are overcoming average. Welcome back to another episode of the Hard Thing Podcast. This is the show that's going to help you improve your life by doing hard things that are in between you and the life you want to have. Today, we are talking about suicide prevention, living a meaningful life, finding the will, and not necessarily the will, but developing the skill to laugh at yourself and at your life, and as well being able to know what to do if someone around you is contemplating suicide. It was an excellent conversation. For those of you who are new to the show, basically the show is all about helping you take the steps, do the things that are in between you and having a better life. We want to give you the tips, tricks, tools, tactics to really have the kind of life you want to have. Before we get into the show, though, which is actually a conversation show between me and a guest, a couple announcements. First, I want to invite you to our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/The Hard Thing Podcast. Today, we talk a lot about mental health. And if you are struggling, the Facebook group is a great place to find solace, or at least reach out and connect with other people. We're not going to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. We're just going to listen to you. It's a great place to be. So find some friendship there as well as some connections. Facebook.com/groups/The Hard Thing Podcast. Next thing, help us raise $1,000 for Operation Underground Railroad. Operation Underground Railroad is a nonprofit organization that goes undercover to rescue kids from sex trafficking. They are a wonderful organization. I volunteered for them many times, and they need our help. So go to gofundme.com/overcoming-average. Help us raise $1,000 for them. Now, let me get to today's conversation with Frank King, the mental health comedian. Like I said, Frank, we talk a lot about suicide prevention because, well, Frank King has tasted his own gun. He knows what it tastes like. He was contemplating suicide and then he decided not to. And he'll explain the reasons why in a moment. But while you're listening, I would like to encourage you to think about what habits you have in your life and where they're leading you. What habits are leading you to fulfillment and meaning, and what habits are leading you away from that. And if you at any point during this conversation realize that you have depression or that you're struggling with some things that you need some help with, feel free and reach out to me. Please, I'm begging you, reach out to me or someone else that you know that can just listen to you. And if you are contemplating suicide, please reach out to or text the suicide prevention hotline or text line. I'm going to put the number for the text line in the show notes as well as the hotline. But please, for heaven's sake, reach out and don't do anything brash or rash. I don't know what the word is, but I'm here for you if you need to talk. And Frank is as well. But none of that. Let's get to today's show. Oh, and another quick aside, in the middle of the conversation, my computer actually died because it overheated, which is funny because Frank actually sent me a picture of himself in a tank top, and he was bodybuilding, and he's a comedian, so it's funny, but that's why that happened. So again, topsy-turvy conversation with Frank King. Listen up. All right, well, thank you for being on the show, Frank. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
I wish I could say the same.
Well, whether you're ready or not, let me ask the question that I ask all my guests. Frank, what is the hardest thing you've ever done?
What is the hardest thing I've ever done? Mm-hmm. When I had the gun in my mouth in April of 2010, the hardest thing I ever did was not pulling the trigger.
Wow. Obviously, I'm going to ask some follow-up questions because you can't just drop a sentence like that and just move on. So what led up to that moment?
Well, I was doing the corporate comedy thing, speaking after dinner, after lunch. They call it the rubber chicken circuit, where you go in, the awards banquet, I tell jokes for 45 minutes. And with the recession, the last recession, a phrase I never thought I'd use,
right?
The last recession, business dropped off 80% overnight, and my wife and I lost everything we'd worked for in 25 years in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. And that's when I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like. Spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger. A friend of mine heard me say that because I say it at every keynote I give on suicide prevention. He came up afterwards, he goes, "Hey man, how come you didn't pull the trigger?" I go, "Hey man, could you try to sound a little less disappointed?" Yeah, I didn't pull the trigger, by the way. because the life insurance policy I had, it was $1 million life insurance policy, and there's a 2-year suicide clause. So if you kill yourself within the first 2 years, the policy pays nothing. If you wait until 2 years and a day, then it pays $1 million. And so I refused, although I wanted to be gone, and I felt like a burden that the world would be better off without me. That's one of the big things about people who are having thoughts of suicide is a burdensomeness. The world would be better off without me. I didn't want to leave my wife brokenhearted and broke because I only had the policy 22 months. So I had to wait 2 months and a day to kill myself. And because I have chronic suicidal ideation, meaning I can pull the trigger anytime, it's always an option for me and people like me as a solution for problems large and small. Suicide is. Here's how small. My car broke down a couple of years ago. I had 3 thoughts unbidden. Get it fixed, buy a new one, or I could just kill myself. That's chronic suicidal ideation. So I had to wait 2 months. I couldn't pull the trigger, leave my wife brokenhearted and broke. And by the time the 2 months had elapsed, I don't recall the 2 months and a day thinking, well, I can do it now. Things must have gotten a little better, just enough so it didn't cross my mind to go ahead and do it. And that's why I'm sitting here right now.
Wow. That is so strange. First of all, that insurance even has that policy. I mean, I'm kind of happy that it is, because hopefully it's saved more than just your life,
Well, and my insurance agent, because I called him up to find him how long it had the policy. And he said, I don't know, I'll check. And I could hear him clicking on the keys on the computer. And he comes back on and he goes, 22 months. And then it hit him that I wasn't just asking how long I had the policy. I was asking for permission to kill myself.
Wow.
And he goes, no, don't do it. Because he had had people call and find out that they'd had the policy long enough, past 2 years, and he had delivered the benefit checks to the surviving spouse or whatever.
Wow. So in a sense, that could be an argument for why insurance agents should have suicide prevention training.
He should. Well, he said to me when he realized what I was asking, he said, I said a quick prayer that whatever I said next would have an impact on you and prevent you from dying by suicide. And I said, Graham, it doesn't really matter what you say. It's the fact that you said something. You stepped out of your comfort zone and you cared enough to say something. And because I called him right after I did my first TED Talk, because I mentioned him in my TED Talk, and I tell that story. And he said, yeah, when I hung up the phone, I told my wife, Frank, that I thought you were going to kill yourself. And here you are. So I'm glad you did.
Wow. I think that actually opens up to a topic that I think we should talk about. So, and this is obviously more generalized, but if someone is exhibiting suicidal thoughts or it looks like they're trending that way, what can people around them, or what should they do?
Well, that's the good news, Justin, is 8 out of 10 people who are contemplating suicide are ambivalent. They want someone to interrupt, and 9 out of 10 in the last 7 days leading up to an attempt give you hints, direct, indirect, verbal, nonverbal, behavioral. So if you notice any of those, and that's what I teach signs and symptoms of depression, thoughts of suicide, so you can recognize. If you suspect someone, I always say go with your gut. If something in your head says, I think he's going to kill himself, then go with that. And you have to ask them this question: are you going to kill yourself? Just like that. And if you can't ask that question, find somebody who can. And if they say no, or let's say they say yes, then your job at that point is to get them on the phone with the suicide prevention lifeline, or if they're younger, texting to the suicide prevention text line, which is 741-741. But let's say you suspect they're suicidal, but they don't admit it. I would say, are you depressed? Yes. Are you having thoughts of suicide? Yes. Do you have a plan? If they have a plan and it's detailed, that's when you get them on the phone with the suicide prevention lifeline. If it's not particularly detailed, their plan, what I say next is, well, are you going to kill yourself? And if they say no, then I think the most important question is, well, then tell me why not. Make them give voice to the reason they're going to stick around.
Wow. I think it's very important that just those kind of steps are, like you said, voiced, because I don't think they teach it enough. Uh, I my sister has dealt with someone who has exhibited, that she was contemplating suicide, and I don't think my sister knew what to do, because it's not like they teach you this stuff in school, which honestly they kind of should. Did you ever, aside from your insurance agent friend, did you ever have anyone reach out to you that was trying to help leading up to that moment?
No, because one of the 2 out of 10, Justin, that was not ambivalent. I was the 1 out of 10 that wasn't going to give any hints. I was just going to pull the trigger.
Wow.
Um, as for your sister, I would recommend that anybody who's interested, there's something called mentalhealthfirstaid.org, mentalhealthfirstaid.org. They have classes, an all-day class, 8 hours, and they throw in lunch, and it's kind of a mental health 101. They cover everything from depression and schizoaffective disorder to non-lethal self-harm like cutting and burning. And they give you a binder so you have a solid resource. And if you go on the website, type in like a 25-mile radius of your house. And the classes cost anywhere from nothing to about $25. It's a great way to learn the basics of mental health and mental illness, so that somebody's exhibiting signs, you can go to your binder, you look up depression, you look for signs. Oh, look, there are 3 signs. And then it's got a thing on, the next thing is things to do, and then resources. So it's mentalhealthfirstaid.org. It's a great program.
Awesome. I will put that up in the show notes. Now, kind of an interesting question. So you have this moment where you are very close to suicide. You decide not to do it because, well, you don't want to leave your wife brokenhearted and broke, as you said.
Yep.
What then led you to start actually actively talking about suicide prevention, rather than just kind of saying, yeah, it's something that I dealt with, I don't really like to talk about it?
Well, I began my comedy career in San Diego in 1984. I went on the road in 85 as a professional with my girlfriend, then now my wife of 33 years. She came along for the ride. And we did 2,629 nights in a row nonstop. No home, just voicemail, post office box. And before I was a comedian, I was an insurance agent. And so lots of meetings, lots of motivational speakers, Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, the old school guys. And I would sit in the audience, Justin, I'd think to myself, man, I could do that if I just had something to teach somebody besides making them laugh.
Yeah.
So I cast about for years. What could I'd really like to do that, but I got nothing to share. So after I came so close, I realized my family runs in my family. It's called generational depression and suicide. My grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I screamed for days. So given my family history, and then I took some training. One's called Working Minds, which is suicide prevention as a workplace health and safety issue. And then I took QPR, Question, Persuade, Refer, where you learn the signs and symptoms, what to say, what not to say. And I thought, I could be a speaker, not a funny speaker, but a speaker who was funny. So put the serious stuff, lead with the serious stuff. And I thought, now the question is, how can I rebrand myself? Because for the last 15, 20 years, I've been the funny guy. So my wife said, how about a TEDx talk? And I said, what's a TEDx talk? And just by chance, I got an audition notice for a TEDx in Vancouver, British Columbia. So I filled out the application and I got it. And that's how I began to rebrand. I came out on stage, I think at age 56, I guess. First time I'd ever told anybody that I was depressed and had thoughts of suicide was on the TEDx stage. And nobody knew. My family, my friends, my wife. My wife's about to play the video once it mounted on YouTube. And I said, wait, don't hit play yet. I got to tell you 6 things you don't know. She had no idea.
Oh my gosh.
But that allowed me to begin to rebrand with the speakers bureaus and the meeting planners, the folks who would book me to do a gig.
Yeah.
And then I've done 4 TEDx talks, all on mental health, all on one facet or another of mental health since then. Again, in an effort to rebrand, credibility,
So let me just get this right. Your wife never knew, like not even just. So, and this is kind of a question that I'd actually written down, because but it really ties in right here. I find that, especially with depression, we kind of tend to isolate ourselves and not open up and connect with other people. At least from my experience, from what I've seen. Um, why do you think we do hide that and we don't reach out and ask for help or anything like that?
Well, and most people who have mental illness are really good actors. There's a reason I have a Screen Actors Guild card, a SAG card, because I'm a good actor. People say, "Can you act?" I go, "Look, I acted like I was happily married to my first wife for 5 years. What do you think?" Um, but yeah, we don't want to burden somebody. Don't want to burden anybody. I was depressed one day. I'm in the driveway. My wife's getting ready to go to work. I'm doing some yard work. I'm depressed. I think I'll tell her. And then my next thought was, if I tell her I'm depressed, I'm not going to feel any better, and she's going to feel worse. So we keep it to ourselves. And by the way, the rolling up to a suicidal, whatever, is a three-legged stool. Social isolation, like you talked about, a burdensomeness, the world would be better off without me. And the third thing is you've crossed that barrier mentally where you are willing to take your life. Even infants have a will to live, a strong will to live, but you have to cross that barrier as a third leg of the stool. I think there's another reason is stigma. There's a stigma attached to having a mental illness, and there's a separate stigma attached to having thoughts of suicide. So people with either or both tend not to share that information. And that's my job, Justin. That's what people pay me for. That's what they tell me they pay me for, is to start the conversation on suicide, to give people permission to give voice to their feelings and experiences surrounding mental illness and suicide, because nobody really talks about it. But if you mention it out loud, dear God, everybody's got a story, either about themselves, a family member, a friend. So that's my job, is to come in, be vulnerable on stage. Vulnerability is my superpower. I get up there, I talk about it, I get choked up. And to see a guy, a man, on stage, revealing these things about himself and getting choked up is, it's a powerful, and it encourages other people. I say to the audience when I get done, look, we're going to do a general Q&A. You can ask any question you like. And after we get done with that, if you have a question you don't want to ask in front of everybody, like, hey, I'm crazy, can you help me? I'll hang out afterwards and I'll answer the questions individually until we get done. And sometimes there's one person waiting, and sometimes there's 8 lined up with an individual question about depression, suicide, about themselves, someone they love. I was doing my fourth TED Talk, and somebody on one of the other speakers said to me, "You're in the first flight of speakers. You're going to leave after you get done." I said, "I can't leave." They go, "Why can't you leave?" I go, "When we break for refreshments, just watch what happens." So sure enough, we break for refreshments, and there's 8 people lined up to talk to me. I said, "That's why I can't leave, because they've got questions and I do my best to answer."
Has there ever been a question that has been particularly difficult to answer?
Sometimes I don't know the answer. Somebody will say, well, how does it compare men to women in terms of thoughts of suicide or suicide attempts? That one I happen to know. Women attempt 3 times as often as men, but men tend to complete the act because they use a gun. But there are questions like that, do Native Americans have a higher rate? Which I know the answer to, yes. But questions with statistics and such, and I always offer, give me a business card. I'll do a little research and get back to you. The most difficult questions, and the ones that there was somebody at the TEDx, the 4th one. It was in Pensacola, Florida. A woman and her daughter were there vacationing, and they went on Google, what to do in Pensacola, and they saw the TEDx talk, and they saw my name, and they saw suicide prevention speaker. So they paid $95 a piece to come to the TEDx to basically to talk to me. And they were first in line after we broke for refreshment. And her brother had come to live with her about 3 months before. He'd been depressed, and he seemed to be getting better. And then she came home from work one day and found he'd died by suicide. And what she wanted to know, she wanted me to decode for her, I had gone close enough to the abyss to stare down into it, and I came back. And her brother stared down into it and didn't come back. And she wanted to know why I was able to come back and he was not. And then she asked, why would he want to kill himself? And the answer there is, chances are he didn't want to kill himself. He just wanted to end the pain.
Wow. Uh, um, I have to ask. So, you say after all of your speeches and your talks, there's someone or someones who want to ask you questions. Um, I have to think that there's probably a small percentage of people that might be dealing with the problems you're talking about and the challenges that they don't feel comfortable reaching out to you. What sort of things could they do maybe that don't take, if someone's shy but they're really depressed or something like that? I'm just thinking of that one person who goes to your talk and feels connected, and they're like, yeah, this is what I'm going through, but I could never talk to him because, like you said, I don't want to be a burden, or I'm just not, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, what could they do?
Well, I would say they should get it first to get evaluated to find out what exactly it is that's causing the problem, by a mental health professional. Just to figure out, is it depression? Is it schizoaffective disorder? Is it, is it situational, or is it organic and clinical depression? And then I would say if medication is indicated, there's a cheek swab DNA test like Ancestry.com.
Mhm.
Only they take a cheek swab of your DNA and they try to match that with the psychotropic drug or drugs that would work best with your particular metabolism. So you get a lot less of the lab rat, go on, taper off, go on, taper off. And the other thing is I put my phone number on the screen, my cell number, because sometimes people don't even want to ask questions individually after I get done. They don't want to get in line. So I put my cell number. I go, look, here's the deal. If you're having thoughts of suicide, call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. If you're just having a really bad day, call a crazy person. And here's my phone number. Because we're less likely to judge.
Yeah.
We're not going to do what they call should all over you. You should do this and you should do that and you should try fish oil. We're just going to listen. And so I've come out of meetings and I've had people text me immediately as soon as I left the building. They didn't want to ask a question in front of everybody, but they wanted to reach out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I offer is, look, if you don't feel like you can do it in front of anybody, just give me a call or text me. And people call. A guy called me one time and he goes, oh my God, this is really your cell number. I said, well, how mean would that be? You get a fake number. I said, as a comedian, I'll make it worse for you. Hold, please. And I said, I'll make it even worse. The on-hold music is this. Another one bites the dust. Then another one bites. So I would, if you're struggling, I would have yourself evaluated. I would, if medication indicated, I got lucky when I got a medication. It worked. First one worked fine. But if it hadn't, I would have done cheek swab to find the antidepressant that works best in my metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's, I've created a self-care plan. Most people with mental illness have what they call a safe self-care plan. Mine is kind of a holistic, not just drugs. Mine is diet, exercise, good night's sleep, meditation, and medication. So I have a wide variety of things I do to maintain. Doesn't stop me from getting depressed occasionally. I still cycle down. It's kind of like a wheel with a flat spot on it. That's clinical depression. It recurs, but it helps to dull the pain. And so I have a self-care plan. And then there's something called gamification. People say I can't get out of bed in the morning, and I've had days like that. Not physically can't get out of bed. I could physically get out of bed, but mentally I just want to hide under the covers. So the game is, I make a to-do list of 6 things. And the game is, once I scratch off number 6, I can go back to bed. I don't care if it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, broad daylight. I can go back to bed and binge watch the second season of Ozark on Netflix. I win. And that gamification, it gets me to the gym. Gym's 25 minutes away. Longest walk for me is from my bed to the car.
Mm-hmm.
If I get in the car and drive 25 minutes, if I get to the gym, my deal with myself is, if I get there, all I got to do is 1 rep of 1 exercise, I can turn around and go home. I've never just done 1 rep, but the deal is, if I feel that way, I can turn right around and go back. So that's the game. So it's called gamification. And I encourage people to try to control the things they can control. I've been doing podcasts and webinars and virtual keynotes on staying sane and social distancing. And it turns out that the skills I've developed, self-care and gamification, things like that, come in really handy for neurotypical people who are now waking up every morning in an uncertain world. Because I wake up in an uncertain world every day, pandemic or no. So those skills I've developed are transferable to neurotypical people who are now living with perhaps situational depression because of the pandemic and social distancing.
Mhm. I have to say, the last tip, gamification, is probably one of my favorite things ever. Are you familiar with Steve Cam of Nerd Fitness? Okay, well, he's basically. It sounds like exactly, what it sounds like. He is a nerd, a self-proclaimed nerd who wanted to get fit, so he kind of created this system where you could create a profile, call yourself, your class, whether you're a barbarian, ranger, all those nerd things, and then you create quests that involve real life things that give you points, and it's very fascinating. But it's all along these lines of gamification, and you look at video games or basically anything, and we're inclined to want to progress to the next level and have fun doing so. So I think gamification, in fact, I created a spreadsheet that takes me from podcaster level 1 to level 2 and so forth. So I'm a huge fan of gamification.
Well, let me show you something. You may be able to see this on the camera because this is on my bucket list.
Mm-hmm.
And I've used gamification. And by the way, at one time, my last gig was in Chicago. On the evening of May 12th, I went down to the gym. And it was a Hilton. It was a Hilton. It had a lovely gym. I got on the elliptical runner, and I thought to myself, you know what? I should go to bed. So I did 1 minute on the elliptical runner.
It counts.
And then I went to bed.
Yeah.
But the next morning I got up and I did an hour. But I mean, I put on my gym clothes. I went down. I did 1 minute. I go, fine. I'm done. I win. I'm going to bed.
Yeah.
But it got me to the gym. I mean, that's the whole point is.
Yeah. 50% of life is just showing up,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Was it Woody Allen said 85% of life is just showing up?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I think like I said, the longest mile for me is not from here to the gym. It's from my bed to the car. I'm looking for a particular photograph. Yeah, I waited until I was over 60 because I figured after 60, most of the guys would have given up.
It's a pretty good strategy.
Yeah, I never, I'm not, I'm an ectomorph. I know people don't think there's such thing as small bones. I'm fine boned, like a bird. Mm-hmm. And I'm never going to really, Right. But when you get over 60 in the masters category, it's not about size so much as it muscularity, vascularity, proportion. So it at least gives me a shot to win my category. So
yeah. Also, from what I've understood, weight training is very beneficial towards, longevity, being able to retain your fine motor skills and just have a good quality of life, farther on into your life. So I think bodybuilding is a great way to do it if you're going to do it, right?
And I start with an aerobic workout on the elliptical. So and it's the elliptical with the your hands in, mm-hmm. Upper body, lower body. Mm-hmm. It's a great overall workout. Plus, it gets the heart rate. I didn't mention that I've had 2 aortic valve replacements, a double bypass, a heart attack, and 3 stents.
Wow.
All familial, nothing lifestyle. I just inherited all of that from my family, along with mental illness. Thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's how I got into the gym to start with, was working on the cardio so I wouldn't have another heart attack. And then I thought, add a few pounds on the weights and a little harder on the elliptical, maybe I could get in shape to do and then the keto diet. And then when I discovered intermittent fasting, that was what I do now is I eat for an hour a day and then I fast for 23.
Wow. Wait, you only eat 1 hour in the day?
Yep, 1 hour in the morning, and then I fast until that hour the next morning.
Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. And you said it's also ketogenic?
Yeah, and the ketogenic and the fasting go together really nicely. Because you're not doing carbs, you're not getting that blood sugar like this.
Right.
So with the keto, your blood sugar is generally level, and because if I was doing carbs, I think I'd crash so hard I'd have to eat.
For sure.
But with the ketogenic, it's just, and then I do bouillon. You can have bouillon with a little MCT oil in it to take the edge off the hunt. Yeah.
And is that something you're doing just in preparation for your competition, or is that just kind of the lifestyle you've adopted?
Initially, it was for my first competition, October of 2018, but it worked so well.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you, but I have trouble restricting the number of calories I have. But I don't, one of my superpowers is not eating.
Mm-hmm.
So during that hour, I eat whatever I want. I mean, healthy food, ketogenic food.
For sure.
But after that, I can easily go till the next morning, same time, with a little help from the bouillon.
Yeah, yeah. That's so fascinating. Because in my studies, I've heard of different routines. The one I've heard most familiar is you eat for 8 hours and then fast 16. But I've never heard the 1 hour. That's so interesting.
It's a little hardcore.
I mean, that's kind of an understatement. What made you decide to try that? Like, where did you hear that methodology?
Somewhere I saw a book on fasting. So I got the complete book of fasting or something like that. And in that book, they mentioned bodybuilding and another book called Eat, Stop, Eat. And so I got the Eat, Stop, Eat book, which is has more specific information toward bodybuilding.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, and I was working cruises at the time. So I thought, what I'll do is I'll begin the fasting on the ship. Because what I can do if I get really hangry, hungry and angry, I can lock myself in my cabin. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And it was amazing. I mean, I was at hour 23, I'm in the gym working out just as hard as I normally do. When I worked out, I did a 4-day fast. And my workout partner goes, man, I think you're actually stronger when you don't eat. I said, yeah, you know what? They've been feeding me to hold me back.
Yeah. I'm personally, because I actually do kind of intermittent fasting. I don't eat till 12 o'clock and things like that. But I found that a lot of things seem to work better when you don't have food in your stomach, because you don't really have to worry. Like, it's like your body's not thinking about that food, so it can focus on other things, if that makes sense.
No, it does. My workout partner really said, man, I've noticed when you don't eat, you're doing more reps, you're doing more weight. So it just happens to work for me. And like I said, I have trouble restricting my calories, eating a low calorie diet, but with the, during that hour, if it's on the keto list, I'm pounding it down.
Yeah. I think that's essential.
And then,
I think that's an essential point you brought up, how you notice that one specific diet plan doesn't really work for you, but you found one that you're able to stick with consistently and it's produced the results you want. I think they don't really teach that approach in any sort of nutrition class or anything like that. You gotta find what works for you, experiment till you find something that works and checks all the boxes, and then, you're good to go.
With fasting, there's no pills, no powders, no shakes, no special food. You actually save money on food because I'm only eating once a day.
Yep.
And so don't have to count calories, don't have to, so yeah, not every diet works for everybody, but this combination works well for me.
Yeah, I would definitely say the intermittent fasting is a procrastinator's paradise, because all you got to do is just, I'll eat later. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'll get to that.
Yeah, it's nice.
Today we left to go shopping during my normal breakfast time, so I think I fasted 26 hours and change.
Wow, that's like people would never think, they would never think about doing that just because of suffering and pain, which actually I find interesting, because you've mentioned that from all of your genetics, you've inherited a lot of predispositions for pain and suffering. Do you think kind of the two go hand in hand? Your ability to you said it's your superpower. Do you think that might be because you're just kind of used to dealing with a lot of pain and suffering anyways?
I think, Justin, that's because I have a little touch of OCD.
Really? Why do you think that?
Well, because I do have a little touch of obsessive compulsive disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And so I use that to, people go, you eat the same thing every day, same time every day, once a day. Yeah. How do you do that? OCD help for that.
I kind of, I have to.
Yeah, I kind of have to.
Yeah.
So it was one of those things that it just makes sense to me. It's like I said, no pills, no potions, no shakes, no special food. They actually save money on food. And in my case, It helps to lower cholesterol. It's great for people who have diabetes. It helps
Mhm.
balance out your blood sugar. That fasting. And if you look at most major religions, they have somewhere in their theology,
Mhm.
there's a fast. People have been doing it for, centuries. And then back in the time of the cavemen and cave women, the term feast or famine didn't come out of nowhere. They would eat when there was food to eat, and they would essentially fast when there wasn't.
Yeah.
And we're not really designed, Justin, to eat breakfast. It says in that book, eat, sleep, eat, stop, eat. Breakfast, as humans, we're not really designed to get up and eat. But it's something that the breakfast cereal companies have fooled everybody. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Not really.
Right.
So
That's fascinating. And that kind of makes me think of a topic, actually going back to Steve Kam. He actually wrote a book. And in the book, he talks about how one of his goals was to become like Jason Bourne from the movies, The Bourne Ultimatum, so forth. Jason Bourne, he eats when he can. He runs for a day, running from the bad guys or whatnot, and then he can eat for like a full day. And Steve Kam brings up this topic of anti-fragile, and that's kind of what you're describing to me, where it's not so much you're resilient, but you're so resilient that your trials and tribulations and the things you put yourself through make you stronger rather than weaker. And that, that's why I kind of connected your experiences with your pain and suffering with your ability to just go 24 hours without eating.
well, when the pandemic came up, everybody's hoarding food. I thought, you know what? But I can go 4 days without eating. So I give me a jar of peanut butter, and for the fourth day, and I'm good.
Yep, I'm good. And that's a nice way to live. A nice way to live. I actually kind of want to switch. I had a question earlier. You mentioned that in talking with the people who you'd put your phone number on the board and whatnot, and they give you a call, you didn't put any should haves into the conversation. You just listened. And I feel like listening is it's a crucial skill that a lot of people don't have. From your experiences, what sort of tips or advice can you give to people to learn how to better listen? And I know that's kind of a stupid question, but
no, it's a good question. One thing is actively listen. 2, if you're going to have a serious conversation like that, make sure that you are in a good place physically and mentally. Don't do it when you've got a wretched cold. 3, if you're going to meet somewhere they're comfortable and it's relatively private, and don't back up another appointment against this conversation. Make sure you have time if it stretches past whatever time you had allotted, so you're not doing this, looking at your watch. And it's often a matter of just letting them talk, just talk it out, and just kind of nodding and making the appropriate noises. Oh, dear God. Oh, Lord, I can't believe that. Oh, gosh. I don't know how you survive it. And that's where you avoid that. You should try fish oil. In the mental health business, it's called don't should all over them. Mm-hmm. Because that's what normal, typical people who mean well, they people want to solve problems. People want to fix things. And, they got their, as the person is talking, they're thinking about what could possibly be done to fix this. And I'm not telling you because I want a solution. I'm telling you because I need to get it off my chest. I need somebody to listen to me and, to validate my existence and care and perhaps plant. My job is to plant a seed of hope. Somebody's depressed, I go, look, I know you're not lazy, crazy, or self-absorbed. I know that depression is a mental illness. Here's the good news. With time and treatment, things will get better. I will take the time. I'll help you get the treatment and meet it. And then important is a couple days later, follow up. Hey, man, after our conversation the other day, I was just calling to check in and see how you're doing. So, showing that you care enough to follow up.
Wow. You've come across as a very caring person. And I get the sense that, if we were in a room of 1,000 people and one had an issue, you'd leave the 100, go after the one, as it says in the Bible or whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
That's a very admirable trait. How can people, and this is kind of a strange way to phrase this, but how can people develop that characteristic to be able to, watch out for the one?
Oh, you mean develop empathy?
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you've ever read with it. Here's the deal. Brene Brown. People kept saying you got to read Brene Brown's book. I'm like, how good could she be? Then I listened to her book on Audible. I'm like, oh my god. She says sympathy is I feel sorry for you, and empathy is I feel sorry with you, and that's empathy. It's easy to feel sorry for someone. Empathy is hard to come by because you have to kind of walk a mile in their moccasins to be empathetic. It's a difficult trait to develop. And if you don't have it, if you're not too wise for it, I'm not sure it can be developed. To tell you the truth, I think what I find is people who have been through the ringer, as you said, been through all sorts of difficulty and pain and suffering, they tend to be more empathetic. After our bankruptcy, I was far more empathetic. It made me more empathetic. I had a little episode where I came back from Cambodia from a cruise ship, and everybody thought I came back to the United States dragging the coronavirus. And I got attacked online by the trolls. I mean, it was awful. I changed my home phone number, deactivate 3 social media accounts for 3 weeks, and handle the death threats. And it made me understand what it's like to be a pariah. Have a lot of people thinking awful things about you and saying them online. And so it heightened my sense of empathy. There's a woman at a grocery store where we shop who's used to be a man, I believe. I don't know for a fact that she's transgender, but I believe so. And I've been through her line a few times, and we just, chatted as you would in line, nothing really deep. And I went in one night, she was working customer service, she had her back to me, and it all of a sudden hit me that I was getting a little taste of what she must have faced or faces as a transgender person in terms of, harsh and hate and feeling like an outsider, like you don't belong. And so I said to her, with her back to me, I said, hey, goodness. And she turned around, and I'd never seen her smile before, and her face lit up. And I thought, that's what it's like. That's what it's like for her, is that, she feels like an outsider. She feels like a pariah. She feels the hate and as a transgender person. And so I just, once again, I think because all that I went through, I'm a little more empathetic toward people who have that sort of situation where they feel like they're an outsider and they're being harshed and hated upon.
Yeah. It kind of goes back to like what you said, Brene Brown, she said, like you said, you feel sorry with the other person, weep with those that weep and mourn with those that mourn, again, as the Bible says. And it's funny how that keeps coming up.
And she said something else that I really resonated with me, and I've said it many times in my keynotes, but not quite as eloquently as she did. She says, I am so comfortable in my dark that I can sit comfortably with you in yours. And I read her say it like, oh, because that's how it is. I have, because I'm so comfortable in my darkness, I can comfortably sit with you in yours, which again is back to that listening thing. I can sit with you when a friend of mine said one time when he was talking to another friend of ours who was struggling, and the guy was, he was bearing his soul, complaining, and I guess you wouldn't say moaning and groaning, but he was lamenting. And he said to our mutual friend, listen, I'm sorry to put you through this. You have to listen to all this. And our friend said to him, look, I'd rather hear 3 hours of this than 15 minutes of the eulogy at your funeral. That's empathy.
Wow. So I guess, at this part, I have to, just say to the audience, if you get a chance, just listen to someone with, striving for empathy as we've just described. I wanted to ask you one last question before we transition to the final questions.
Final Jeopardy round? Okay.
Yeah, kind of. You use humor to instill hope. What are some tips you can give to people that can't really see the humor in their own lives, or they're just not being able to see they can't really find the will to laugh. So what advice would you give them?
Oh, kids will tell you that comedy is tragedy plus time. Yeah. And so what I recommend is journal. Write down your experiences. Because a month, 2 months, a year from now, when you read back over them, you may be able to see, because of the gift of time, the humor in what happened. Can't see it now because it's too close. But, perhaps a month or two, a year from now, when you look back at your journal, you may be able to find the funny in what happened. Comedians, by the way, the longer you do comedy, the shorter the time between tragedy and comedy. When I had my heart attack, I was telling jokes in the hospital, in my little triage unit, having a massive heart attack. The nurse said to me, Frank, I've got one question I have to ask you. And bear in mind, I'm having a massive heart attack. I said to her, honey, I'm married. She's trying not to laugh. She goes, no. Your full name is Frank Marshall King III, but what do you like to be called? Again, I'm having a massive heart attack. I said to her, Big Daddy. To this day, when I go back to Oregon Heart and Vascular, if I see somebody I met that morning, hey, yeah, so it's a skill. You just have to, it's one of those things where I say you have to put your giggle goggles on. You begin to train your mind to find the funny in whatever it happens to be. And again, oftentimes on the cusp of whatever happened, it ain't funny. It's almost impossible to see the funny. But in retrospect, with the gift of time, that's what comedians often do. They write down their experiences, and it's too painful to talk about. And a year from then, they go back and they go through it again, and it's like sculpting. A sculptor will tell you that if you have a block of marble and you want to carve an elephant, you just knock away everything that doesn't look like an elephant. Mm-hmm. And comedy's that way. You go back and look at that journal entry, and you want to find the funny, you just knock away everything that, that's not funny. And there's the humor.
That's very insightful. My wife and I, whenever we go on road trips, we always listen to comedians, and every time I listen to them now, I'm probably going to think about what you said and think, wow, they must just, they're emotionally turmoiling inside,
Yeah, well, and the great thing about doing stand-up, especially on the road, when you're doing it night after night after night, is something happens to the ordinary person, they just have to live with it. Mm-hmm. But if you're a comedian and something happened that afternoon and really upset you, I've gone on stage and done a rant, a funny rant on what happened. Yeah. It's like therapy. You get to give voice to all that in front of a crowd who's seated and got to sit there and listen to it. Yeah. I mean, we want to make it funny, but like I said, comedians can do that. They have an awful day, and then they can tell you, then that night they can just bare their soul and make it funny. Yeah,
that's super interesting. Wow, I have so many more questions that I'd like to put into this conversation. I've had a lot of fun. It's been topsy-turvy. My computer died and all sorts of things I didn't expect. But Frank, let me ask you the last couple questions I ask all my guests. Based on our conversation today, what we talked about, what 1 to 3 action items would you give our audience to do today or this week to improve their lives?
There's a term called side hustle. Mm-hmm. And I fell victim to that over and over and over, where I had a regular gig. I was doing something, let's say stand-up comedy, speaking, but I could make some money doing this and this. And in late 2017, I looked around at the people I knew who were the most successful. And I realized they all do one thing really well. So my first piece of advice would be to be happy. Pick a lane. They say the riches are in the niches. Find your niche, what you do well, and because a side hustle can often just be a distraction. I spend a lot of time with my coaching clients. I can speak on anything. That's terrific. But we need to narrow that down because marketing everything is very difficult.
Very difficult.
That would be one. My second piece of advice, and this would be by the way, if anybody ever asked me to do a commencement speech, this would be my commencement speech. Never pass up a chance to go to the bathroom, charge your phone, or take a nap. Period. because you never know when you're going to get a chance to do any of those three things again.
I love it.
And the third piece of advice, follow your talent. Follow your gift. My lovely wife has believed in me and my talent even when I did not believe in me. She's encouraged me over and over and over. No, follow your gift, follow your gift. And she is correct. And that's why early 2018, I picked a lane, suicide prevention speaking. I picked several target markets. So I niched myself. The riches are in the niches. And people ask me, so let's see, you speak on suicide prevention. What else? That's it. That's it. That's all I do. So when you go to my website, it just screams suicide prevention, because that means that meeting planner goes, this must be the guy. So I think somebody asked Steve Jobs and Warren Buffett for one word on how they were successful, and both of them said the same word: focus. I agree. It took me a long time to read. I was like 56. I mean, I knew it, but I just didn't put it into practice.
Yeah. Sometimes it, misses something in translation from our ear to our brain. I suffer from the same problem.
Somebody asked me in the last Zoom call I had, the last podcast I did. She goes, okay, if you could talk to your younger self, what piece of advice would you give yourself? I said, well, back in San Diego in 95, 96, a woman who ran a speakers bureau said to me, Frank, you can do comedy and speaking. They're not mutually exclusive. Because, Justin, people ask me, what's the difference between a comedian and a professional speaker? About $7,500 a day plus expenses. If I had taken her advice in 1996, I'd be living in a much bigger house. Yeah. Because you can do both. I mean, comedy and speaking are basically the same gig. It's just one is for a club and one is for a corporate entity or an association, and pays a heck of a lot better. Every now and then, Justin, just for fun. I've got friends of mine who are in their 60s still doing comedy clubs. And sometimes, let's say I go to the Phoenician Hotel in Phoenix, which is 5-star. They got the little bedroom slippers and the robe. When I get to the room, before I unpack my bags, I take a photograph of the room and I put it up on Facebook. And they go, listen, hey, if you're over 60 and still doing comedy clubs, and I put the picture up of the 5-star hotel, you may be doing it wrong.
I bet you have a lot of people reach out to you after that and say, hey, what are you doing? What's going on?
Justin, is nobody goes into comedy because they have a great work ethic. We're doing 45 minutes a night. Come on. And so 36 comics have reached out to me to become professional speakers, but nobody wants to put in the effort to make that happen.
Focus, like what you said. That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, they're crying, the blues because they're older and they can't get booked, and they're doing these horrible one-nighters. And, the thing that gets you into that situation in comedy, being old, that's what they pay for on the corporate side. Your experience, your lived experience, your life experience, the things you've learned, the things you can teach people. The things that hold you back in comedy clubs will make you a lot of money in the speaking circuit. But I can't, there's a long runway before you can take off and do that. So.
Wow. Wow. Again, so many questions. And every time I ask another question, you just open up another rabbit hole that we could just dive down. I didn't even know you were a bodybuilder when we started. So. Look, in the clothes, nobody knows. I think I'm writing a book called Look Good Naked. Mm-hmm. With my clothes on, not much, but with a tank top on, dear. I would rather be that way myself, just honestly.
Yeah, it's kind of a stealth thing, it's and people, the greatest compliment I get over that picture, Justin, is, oh, nice Photoshop. Yeah, well, I got news for you. That's me. Oh my God.
Then they wish they didn't say that just 2 seconds ago.
Yeah, and some of those death threats I got when I came back from Cambodia, if you Google Frank King comedian quarantine, you will find the trouble I had coming back from that part of the world. Nobody on our ship ever had the virus. It was the other ship, the Diamond Princess. Mm-hmm. But people attached it to me, and anyway, every now and then I get a death threat online. I'd seen that photograph, and I go, meet me at the gym.
And I bet they never show up. That's awesome.
Yeah, and you can see, if you look down my chest, you can see the titanium twist ties when they put my chest back together twice.
Oh my gosh. That's
So,
nuts.
yeah, it's
Wow.
a comedian, a guy called me. He said, "Frank, you came back to this county with a virus to kill everybody." And being a comedian, I said, "No, I've got a list, and you just made the VIP section."
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Frank, again, I've enjoyed talking with you so much. It's been a fun conversation. How can our audience reach out to you though, and connect with you and see what you're doing?
Well, my website is thementalhealthcomedian.com. And if you'll put that in the show notes, thementalhealthcomedian.com. And Justin, if they go there, I'm working on a series of 4 books on men's mental health. The first one's out, and I narrated it. I narrated the Audible version, the audiobook version.
Awesome.
And if you go to my website, a little thing will pop up and say, "Do you want the free MP3 of the unabridged audiobook?" So they can download the entire book with me narrating it on men's mental health.
Awesome.
And if they want a TEDx talk, if they go to yourtedxcoach.com, if they go there, there's a free PDF, 6 things you can do to kill your chances of getting a TED talk. So it's if you read over the 6 things you shouldn't do, Justin, it will occur to you, well, if I shouldn't do these, I should probably do just the opposite. Yeah. So yes, either way, you get something free for putting in an email address, and my phone number and my email are all there. And like I said, if you're suicidal, for God's sakes, call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. If you're just having a bad day, call a crazy person, because we hear the same music. You don't have to explain anything.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the show, Frank. Like I said, I enjoyed it so much, and I think our audience will. They're gonna be on the edge of their seats for sure. So, thanks so much.
My favorite part when my good looks overheated your computer.
Exactly. It was about that time when my computer just decided, you know what, it can't do it anymore. So. What did I tell you, folks? What a fun conversation with Frank, but what a serious conversation as well. We were able to talk about things that are very important, get some direct answers. And if you or someone you know, like I said, are contemplating suicide, get help, get some resources. There's all sorts of resources out there. If you feel alone, feel free and reach out to us. Reach out to me, and I'd love to, talk with you, hear your side of the story, and see what's going on in your life. You can reach out to me on Facebook and Instagram at The Hard Thing Podcast. Thanks so much, guys, for being there. I love doing this. I love having these conversations. It's so fun, and it's challenging, but challenging in a good way, which is why we're here. We're here to challenge each of us in better ways. So keep doing hard things, guys. We'll see you here on Thursday for our Thursday Meditations show. But keep doing hard things, and you will overcome average.